So I did get the PowerShell remoting to work. Here's what happened. So the reason I couldn't start the SSHD service on the Windows machine is because my subsystem statement that I have right here was at the very bottom. I actually had to move it up to this next to this FTP subsystem statement. Not 100% sure why that made a difference, but I did. Let's see, so that's why I couldn't SSH, that's why I couldn't remote PowerShell into the Windows machine. The reason I couldn't remote into the Linux machine, I'm trying to remember what fixed that one. I don't think that one had an issue. I just had a statement issue. So with that being said, I restarted all the services. Okay, so the SSHD service statement on the Linux config file, I moved it up to the same spot. So that may have been part of my issue. So you can't put it at the very bottom. It does have a certain place in that config file to go. But so we're on our Windows machine. We can enter a PS session to the Linux machine. But when we do that, we also actually have to send a username with it. I found that this username is a mandatory parameter that needs to be there. But then you can use the term hostname to give it an IP address. If you use computer name, it's looking for the actual DNS computer name of the machine. But since we're using enter-pssession, it wants to default to WinRM. So we have to give it this SSH transport parameter flag. So when we hit enter, we give it a password. So the first time you connect, it's going to give you that same SSH certificate warning saying, hey, are you sure you want to trust this, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And you click yes, and you're in. As you can see, we are on our Linux machine. Just to prove it, I'll do here's the IP, it's 204.131, 204.131. So we are there. So now our Linux can get into our Windows can get into our Linux. Now let's go to Linux. And it's PS. There we go. So it's enter-pssession. We don't have to necessarily give it a username when we're going from Linux to Windows, because it's automatically going to assume that we're going to be the same user. But we're going to give it the IP address of our Windows machine. If we do big, here it is. It's 204.129. We're going to 204.129. Again, we're using enter-pssession. It assumes we want WinRM, so we have to give it the SSH transport parameter. If we hit enter, it wants our password. And as you can see, it's assuming that we're going in with the Vagrant username. So we're going to give it the Vagrant password. And now we can see that we are in our C users Vagrant documents folder of our Windows machine. That is PowerShell remoting over SSH, the way it's supposed to be. So what does this mean? This means now we can go into our Linux environment and remotely manage all of our Linux machines with our Windows laptop. Or how about going into our Windows environment with our Linux laptop or our Mac laptop and managing all of our Windows machines. It's really becoming a cross-platform organization at this point, right? Because a lot of things you do on one system, you can now do on all the other systems. All right, so we've talked about sessions. So we've got some advanced remoting configurations. I'm actually doing a PowerShell GIA, just enough administration talk here in a couple weeks for the ISSA Central Maryland chapter. You guys are more than welcome to come out and listen to that talk. It will be an advanced PowerShell remoting talk. It is only for Windows. PowerShell GIA does not work on Linux or Mac at this point, but those are some of the other advanced remote configurations we can do. Configure SSL, all that good stuff. We also have this thing called implicit remoting, right? Implicit remoting is, you remember how I talked about having the Active Directory users in computers, the AD tools installed on my machine, so I had the Active Directory commandlets. Well, there is a way that you can set up a remote session to, let's say, the domain controller, or maybe a tools server that you have stood up, and do an implicit tool import, meaning, hey, import these tools to my machine, but I really want to run them from your machine, is basically what it's doing. Whenever you do implicit remoting, you're borrowing tools from another system and running them on your machine as if you were on the other machine. Essentially is what that's doing. I've got some examples in the code that you guys can download from my GitHub page where this presentation is, so you guys can go look at that. The particular scripts are in the notes section of the PowerPoints, so you know which ones to go grab. Of course, that would have taken us to a break, but we're going to move on, and we're going to move into Windows Management Instrumentation. What I'm going to say here is WMI is out. WMI itself is not being deprecated, but the commands that we use to invoke the WMI instrumentation, or that we use to invoke WMI, are being deprecated. So what we're moving to, or what PowerShell is moving to, you've seen it earlier in a couple of my other examples, we were using CMI, which is a common management instrumentation, which, to my understanding, whenever I was kind of going over all this, CMI is the open standard of instrumentation management and instrumentation, right? That's the open standard. What Windows has done is it has adopted it and then put its Windows stamp on it and then called it WMI. So that's where that comes from. So now that we've moved to CMI, we can actually, I was in one of the blog posts, and it's not part of this presentation, and it's something I'm going to dig into deeper and maybe come up with a talk later. There's this thing that I saw, is called OMI, which is, I think it was the Open Standard Management Instrumentation, that we can install in Linux. Once we do that, from what I was seeing, is now we can use our CMI commandlets on Linux machines or Mac machines. So what does that mean? That means all the stuff that we used to do with WMI on Windows, we're going to get to do on Linux and Mac through PowerShell with that. So now all of our Windows commands that work for CMI, well, let's start with all of our commandlets that work with WMI, we can transport over to CMI. And then the theory is we can take those CMI commandlets and eventually get those to work on Linux and Mac, meaning we're going to be able to get the battery status of our laptops. We're going to get the last logon user for all of our machines and things like that. So those are things that I see coming down the road, especially whenever I was reading a Windows post about OMI for Linux. Again, stay tuned for that. So this is what I was saying. We're moving into CMI, getting away from WMI. And a lot of the examples I have for this section of the workshop are WMI examples, of which I'll eventually need to update for CMI and then eventually update for Linux. But it's similar to WMI. Use CMI, well, at the time I built this about a year ago, CMI commandlets were wrappers for WMI. Meaning, even though I did a CMI instance ID and I gave it an ID name, it actually went out to get WMI object. Commandlet is what it really did. That's what it means when it's a wrapper for WMI. But with CMI, we're going to use a class name instead of class. So if you've ever used WMI, you can use WMI and you give it a class name, you know, whether it's, oh man, I can't even think of it now because there's so many of them. Win32 class, well, you're going to get a class name of something else is what it's TAC list is not available. You must use a TAC namespace instead. So that's how you get a list of all your things that are available. You have to use namespace versus list. You can't send credentials with it. So what you have to do instead of using credentials, you have to use a invoke-command and then wrap your CMI commandlet or wrap your CMI command within your invoke-commandlet and then give your invoke-commandlet the credential parameter is how that works. Then we have multitasking. So we have jobs. So here's an instance. I was, well, let's just go through the PowerPoint first. So jobs are back, work in the background. They can be synchronous. Synchronous jobs run in the foreground, meaning you're sitting there watching your terminal get locked up while it's processing something. So here's an example. My boss came to me one day and he says, hey, I need you to go through the file server and find anything with the word intramural or sports in it. So of course, what I do, I wrote me a script that went and read every single file on the file server looking for the term intramural or sports. But when I did that, this is before I knew about jobs. So when I did that, it locked up my terminal, and my terminal sat there for a half a day doing nothing except looking for the term intramural or sports. Well, had I known about jobs, I could have ran it asynchronously and put it in the background, which would have still used up my processor for the search, but it would have freed up my terminal to do something else, right? So that's what that's doing. And you can have a local job. You can run WMI as a job. And then you can have remoting as a job. So, so some jobs will kick off other jobs. And so you could actually receive the child jobs of the parent job. Essentially is what it's saying. Let's see, 53. All right, maybe we can. So let's take a look at jobs right quick. Yeah, we got some time. All right, jobs demo. All right, so to start a job, we're going to do start job. We're going to give it a script block. We're going to get service. It's going to run really quick. So I don't know how well this is going to work. So notice we have job 7. It's background. It's running true localhost. So I can run this job, which will be run remotely on my localhost and my desktop, which that's not the correct name. All right, so starting to see how it hung up there for a second. That was because I was running it synchronously up front. But now I can get so that was job 9. So let's run this WMI job. See, we're still using the same credentials that I gave it earlier because it's still stored in my memory because I haven't rebooted the machine or logged out of the terminal or anything. So now I can get jobs. Let me just run that one. It's get job, not get jobs. So here's the 3 jobs that I ran. This one failed. And this one failed. Event log. Oh, you know what? Hang on. All right, let's see if they work now. All right, so they all failed still. I wonder if it's yeah. If I change this to, all right, let's do this. Watch this. So I actually moved over to my Windows PowerShell. Because this particular commandlet no longer exists in PowerShell 7. See? So what I really need to do is kind of update this for get, I think it's min event. Oh, yeah, so get when events, once you can't just grab all the logs out of a certain area. You have to actually give it an ID name or something like that. Let me see. There we go. So now it worked. So let's see. Control B. Let's run this one. Error messages are beautiful. It told me I was missing a bracket. And there we go. So now if I get job, it still failed. All right. I don't know why. But anyway, the point is we're running different jobs. Now, the key point here is if we receive jobs where it has more data. So if this is a long processing job and you do get jobs has more data, if it says true, that means there's, or if it says has data, has more data, that means you have not retrieved the results of this job. All we know is that this very first job that we ran, it completed successfully, and it has data that we have not seen yet. So if I do get job, or how about this? Let's just do it down here. I do receive job, I think I do ID, job 7. Receive job, yeah, let's do ID. ID 7 is what it is. So here's the results of that job, of job 7. But now if I go back to get job, has more data, says false. That means I've already received the results of that job. It only stores it until you see it the first time. So once you see it, it's no longer in there. So now if I do the same thing again, receive job ID 7, there's nothing in there. So that's kind of how you can work with jobs. Code signing. We're not going to talk about that. Backup files. Oh, so this code here, I'll talk about it. I'm not going to demo it, but you could actually use your CAT card to digitally sign your PowerShell scripts. I got it to work in version 5. I have not been able to get it to work in version 7. But there's also a thing you have to do within Windows. You have a certificate that is set to all, but you have to actually uncheck that and check the box that says use for the following. And then all the certificates are selected anyway. So it's a little bit cumbersome to get it set up and everything. You can get with me offline if you want to know how to do that. So back to here. We've got a few minutes left. Let's get through the PowerPoint slides. Schedule jobs. So you can schedule jobs similar to Task Scheduler, but it's different. Scheduled tasks don't produce any output, whereas scheduled jobs, they can produce output. As you can see that the jobs that we did had output that we could see. All right, and these are the different commandlets you would use to figure that. This is one I actually used one time. I think it was during my red teaming event. I actually did that. So let's talk about the security of PowerShell. Prior to version 3, there was no security. Version 3 implemented some. Version 5 actually gave you a little bit more. You have a script block logging module logging, and transcripts now. I have not looked to see what we got whenever we move to 7, but I'm going to assume the way they've been harping on security, we even got a little bit more. I actually seen an article one time that said the evil guys are actually getting away from using PowerShell as a tool of the land. I never read why. It was just one of my buddies that pointed it out because he was a Python guy. And we kind of go back and forth about scripting all the time. So he wanted to point that out. And then I pointed out to him that it was only the bad guys that were using it for, they're stopping to use it for post-exploitation versus administration and defense. So one of the other things we got when we went to 5 is when you double click on a PowerShell script, it is set by default to opening Notepad versus actually running it. So it's kind of like in Bash. If you wanted to execute a PowerShell script, you actually have to do a // and then the script name. You can't just type in the script name and expect it to work. I mentioned about digital signatures, digitally signing your code. You can set your execution policy to only run remote signed. However, just be mindful that that's not really security. It can be easily bypassed with the bypass execution policy flag. All right, execution policy, we talked about it. It's restricted, all signed. It's not really security. The bad guys are going to use bypass anyway to get around any other execution policy. This one right here, the remote signed, is what I use for myself, just to protect me from myself, essentially. I talked about we have module logging and script block logging. These are the event IDs you want to look for it, which are kind of nice because they give you like the full command line execution. So similar to using the sysmon with the Krebs configuration, you can get that right here for PowerShell, right? But you do have to enable script block logging. It's not enabled by default. So here's the commandlet you would use to you do a new item property, put in this transcription. Or no, this is to enable system-wide transcription. In the notes section of this slide, there is a, there's the registry keys that you need to set to enable these. They are not enabled by default. So if you're auditing any Windows machines, I would make sure those are turned on. Just grab these slides and look at the notes section. Same with the system-wide transcription. Transcription is really cool because it gives you a text document. It doesn't write it to a log. You could actually set transcription up to write to a file share if you wanted to. That way you could see who was typing what on what machine and getting what results they got, if that makes any sense, right? It's kind of hard to read, but I was reading a blog post at one point. Somebody is trying to create a tool to make it easier to read, but it's kind of nice to have that. Language modes. Basically what the language modes allow you to do is restrict what part of PowerShell a user can use or an administrator can use. Full language mode means you have the full .NET and all the applications that go along with it. Restricted language mode, I think it may run commandlet functions. They can't run any script blocks. So whenever we were using those invoke commands with the command or the script block, we can't do any of that. No language mode means it's been turned off completely. And then constrained language mode only means I'm allowed to run PowerShell commandlets, essentially. All PowerShell elements. And we use constrained language mode when we talk about PowerShell GIA, which is kind of nice, which would have led us into a break, but we're going to push on. So you've got the basics of PowerShell. So now what you can do is start putting all these one-liners into a document and making it do multiple things and producing multiple items for you. So you're going to take that one process that you do that's repetitive, that you hate doing, you're going to put it into a document. We're going to call it a script. And this is what we're going to talk about here. So basically, normally how you would do it on a command line, you would get process, you put get process into the pipeline, it would give you your stuff, and then it would output. Then you'd have to go back and get your service, put it into the pipeline, get your output, and then bring it out to the screen. But with a script, you're going to get process and get service, put them both into the pipeline at the same time, so that whenever it produces its output, it's going to write it all to the screen at one time. It saves the process of manually doing it. Scopes, quickly about scopes, variable scopes. So when we were talking about the, what you call it, the loops and the ForEach, whenever I had that singular variable, that was a local scope. That was local to that ForEach loop. You could not use that anywhere else. And that's basically what this is saying. So you can have a variable that is local to the function. If it's outside of the function, it could be local to the script. But you can also enable a variable that is global to your session, your PowerShell session, right? And then it would be interpreted into all your scripts that way. There's some notes and some demos in the notes section of this, if you wanted to take a look at it as well. Parameters, we've been talking about these all day, but basically when you're building your scripts, you're gonna, if you add the commandlet binding, this gives you some of the basic parameters that are in every PowerShell script. So you don't have to go and program those in or develop those. You just put that in your script. I don't know if you saw it in the top of one of my scripts, but I had that in there. I think it gives you the what if and the confirm and things like that. But you can make your parameters mandatory, give it a help message, and things like that. You can make them mandatory. You can also not validate, but make them, you know, when we were talking about scripts earlier, we said that they're always a string unless you tell it it's not a string. Well, inside your parameters, as you're building your parameter blocks, that's how you would do it. In front of your parameter name, you would do this. And what these parameters do is they turn them into variables, essentially, throughout the rest of your script. So as your user is filling out these parameters on the command line, it's converting those into variables from within inside the script. And then there's a validates. Basically, this is your user input validation. So if you go back and you look at the create backup files script that I showed earlier, it had a validate one in there, meaning that the extension file could only be 3 to 4 characters long. That's how I think I built it. And if you want to know more, you just type get help and then about functions advanced parameters. Type that in there. You're going to read all about this stuff. And then go back and look at my scripts and my demos to kind of follow along with what's going on. Some random tips, tricks, and techniques. Basically, regular expressions. You can use those to parse your files. So if you're grabbing log files, and you're trying to trace when somebody logged in, when they logged off, and all the log files in between to see what they did, you'll have to actually use a regular expression to grab that login ID that's in those Windows logs. You can use as, is, replace, join, split. Pretty much all the same, string manipulation that we've used in the past with other languages. And you can have date manipulations. Let's see, awk, string manipulation. Yeah, there's some neat demos in here. A lot of it we've already gone over, looking at some of the other things that we've done. But just know that what we've gone over here is not the end all be all. As a matter of fact, we've gone so quick and so fast and so deep. I wouldn't be surprised if your guys' heads aren't spinning at this point, but there's so much more to learn. And there's a couple of people that I follow on Twitter and everything, and there's so much new stuff coming out on almost a weekly basis, right? So there's just, if you feel overwhelmed, it's okay. Just know that you're probably not the only one. It took me years to get to the understanding that I have, and there's still so much more that I don't know. I mentioned earlier, I was helping out a SANS instructor, kind of doing a peer review of a class he's trying to get established for PowerShell. And there was so much stuff in his books that I was peer reviewing that I was like, I took notes. I was like, I gotta go back and look at that, right? Because there's just so much more out there. We didn't talk about any type of error handling, which is gonna be an advanced topic versus it's outside the scope of a crash course. Scripting databases, using the .NET framework that's underneath. That is huge. That's actually something I'm still trying to learn and look at. So just know there's a lot more left. And that pretty much is it for the day. Here are some references. If you wanted to reach out and keep up with some of the things I'm doing, like I said, I am a full-time Maryland Guardsman. Monday, actually I should say Tuesday through Friday. We don't work on Mondays. However, I am deployed to Fort Meade right now, so I will be on Fort Meade Monday through Friday, basically until February-ish. And then I go back to my guard unit down in Laurel, Maryland. But if you have any PowerShell questions, please feel free to reach out. I have no problem helping. I actually enjoy it. You can follow me in some of the things I do on LinkedIn, Twitter. I do have a website that I've been trying to maintain. This video will probably go out there on the website. Some of the other talks I'm doing is, actually, this is not updated. I thought I updated this slide, but it's not. So I have a PowerShell GIA class talk coming up in a couple weeks for the ISSA conference or chapter meeting. Besides Charm is this spring. I'm gonna do this crash course again. I was supposed to do it last Besides Charm 2020, but because of COVID, it got nixed. So they told us, all of us, that we would be invited back for 2021. So that's what I'm anticipating. And so if you know somebody else who wants to sit through this class, just know I'll be doing it at Besides Charm 2021. PowerShell GIA here in a couple weeks for ISSA. I do ask, because you know we're in the military, we all have AARs that we have to do. But for my own improvement and to help you guys out to know what you guys really want out of PowerShell. Oh, hang on. I have if you wouldn't mind doing this survey for me. It's just a 10-question survey that I built inside SurveyMonkey. Basically letting me know how well I did as an instructor, how well the class was put together, if there's anything else that you would like to know about PowerShell. If I get some time, I'll put together a talk and maybe get that done. But yeah, pending any questions and that survey, that's all that I have.
Hey, thank you very much. It was very informative. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.